This is the first video in a set of 4 covering the process of this particular illustration. My goal here isn't to teach you how to paint or illustrate, but rather to explain the workflow as a whole, what the major phases of my illustrations are, and why I take certain steps at certain times, as well as some of the tricks that I employ along the way. Unfortunately, I didn't record the sketching process of this. I decided to record and stream this one once I decided it was something that I wanted to develop further. As you can see, the sketch is very rough. There aren't many details, and I've focused primarily on the main beats of the story that I'm trying to capture here. Illustration goes hand in hand with storytelling. You're trying to capture a brief moment in a single frame to convey what's going on for the story to unfold to the viewer. It's oftentimes much more than just a single image, but rather the viewer can kind of tell what's going on by looking at different parts and how the composition leads their eye through the scene. So here you can see that I've got my gnome character bending down to collect or study a plant in peace and quiet, all the while his orc companion is fighting off a giant aggressive beast. I didn't even bother to make it entirely clear that the beast is a lion. That's something that I'll deal with later. All I've done here is lay out the major elements and the relationship to one another, both compositionally and in terms of the narrative. What's left here are a lot of questions to answer and problems to solve, visually speaking, and that's what we're working on in this phase, as I start to put down the major values. I have 2 overall goals. To make it clear what things are, which is why I'm starting to clarify what's going on with the lion's head and face, and to establish the layers of depth in the scene, that is, what is in front of what. You can probably see the layers are accumulating along the bottom of the left side of the screen, but there's no real plan or logic in how these are separated. Whenever I take the next major step, or a new decision that I'm not entirely committed to, I'll create a new layer and keep painting so I can roll back if I need to. I'm not limiting these layers to any one character object, and I'm continually jumping around different parts of the canvas, avoiding focusing over much on any one area. I also don't want to zoom in at all during this phase to kind of keep myself from getting sucked into any single part. I don't flatten them often, but I can and probably should. I treat the layers as a bit of a time capsule. It's not entirely necessary, and flattening them down can save on memory and increase overall performance as you work. The reason I avoid following any particular structure at this stage is because I find it very constrictive. I don't want to have to think about which layer is which and what I should be drawing on or maintaining any particular strategy to my work. I just want to get my ideas on the canvas and work on solving these visual and design problems as I go. There are disadvantages to this, of course. It allows me to get away with leaving certain questions unanswered and problems unsolved instead leaving things muddy and indistinct in certain areas. Luckily, we're going to deal with this. This is just the first phase of the illustration, and I will take steps later to address this. Now, usually when I'm working on a larger scene, especially anything remotely close to a landscape, but even something like an open room, I'm going to focus on applying atmospheric perspective between the layers of depth. That is the rule that where there are limits to how dark your values can be based on how far away a given object is from the viewer. the farther something is, the less dark its darkest point is going to be. In this case, I very much want to focus on the idea that this line is jumping out of the darkness, meaning that the darkness is farther away from us. So I do want that space behind them to be very dark. This makes playing with depth a little tricky because I can't rely on the usual rules and strategies. I still need things that are close up to be darker, but I don't want to push things away with like lightly colored fog. I need to bring everything up close and find a different way to establish depth. All the same, I still have to focus on making sure that those layers, the background, the lion, the orc, and the gnome, are separated in terms of depth. And in order to achieve that, I make frequent but measured use of rim lighting. It's very easy to let rim lighting kind of go a little bit crazy. But at this stage, I'm not afraid to kind of push it further as long as I know that I can bring it back and kind of make that rim lighting a lot more subtle later on. Also, don't forget to flip your canvas every now and then, as you just saw me do, as it helps to catch mistakes that you may have gotten too used to seeing, given that you may be working on this for hours at a time. This illustration at this point has probably gone on for maybe 3 hours, 4 hours, something like that. And so you do have a tendency to fall into that trap.